Hi, Bruce Berry here again at the Northwest Fly Fishing Outfitters. I'm repping for Pro Sport Fisher, the Pro Tube Fly System, and Montana Fly Company. Today I'm going to show you a Rambulance in the color that's new for 2013 called Shrimpish. So it's going to be another Pro Tube fly, and here we go. Alright, so once again I started with one of the new nanotubes. This time I'm going with clear, and the hook guide's going to be orange. I slid that on the needle, put the nanotube on. It's just a pressure fit. Once I get everything seated, I'll push that hook guide on there. That's a large fluorescent orange. And then this fly, I've got the Rambulance in orange. It's great in the kind of glacially fed waters on the coast. Anytime the water gets a little bit colored up. This one I just kind of, and I've been watching guys pick my pocket with gear, and they've been fishing pink rubber worms, so I kind of just did a spin on the orange version of this fly. So it's going to be orange on the rear end and pink on the front end, and it's a little bit heavier to get down. Generally, my thoughts on weight is put enough weight on it to let it break the surface tension, and then let your sink tip of choice and casting angle define the depth that you're fishing. So this one's a little bit heavier, and it's a little bit more pink. So I'm going to start on the back end with a little dubbing bump. You can see this real small bump back here on the nanotube, and that's just so you don't start too far back and you can still apply a junction. This junction is tapered silicone again. It comes in 4 different sizes for trout all the way through 10-aught saltwater hooks. This is a large. It'll fit size 4, size 2, size 1, and some 1/aughts as long as the ring is not too big. So this dubbing bump I'm just kind of packing right on top of itself. And then I'm going to put a little bit of golden pheasant tippet dyed orange in front of that. I tied in tip first, splayed the feathers out. Secure that with a few wraps. I like to get my scissors in there and kind of run it down the stem. That'll angle these things so they point backwards once they're turned on the tube, kind of a wet fly style. Sometimes that first spin can be a little bit tricky when the stem's really fragile. So just hold the fibers and that should start doing what you want it to do in a turn or so. There we go. So this one I pretty much use the whole golden pheasant tippet, and I'll show you that little saddle here in a second. Once that's all spun on, secure that with a few wraps, cut out the stem. And these guys, I like taking these for the Rambulance. It's way up the big guys at the top. Save this stuff for your little classic spade flies and other stuff. And yeah, they work great. They kind of have that little shrimpy look. They're fairly stiff, so they will pulse in the water nicely. Okay, so with that done, the rear ring on the Rambulance goes next. This is just a hot orange craft fur. So I'm going to cut a patch off of that for you guys. Get a little bit pulled out here. And craft fur, surprisingly, it's kind of wispy out at the tips, and then it gets real fat down at the base. You can see that the short stuff, so I want to get rid of some of that mass. I don't need that on the fly. I'm going to take a flea comb, comb some of that stuff out. Actually, I'm going to go up into a little bit longer fibers and get some of those out of there, and just work this until you like the density and mass of the wing. So I want a nice slight taper to it. That looks pretty good. So for measuring this guy, once I just sweep those back, this should be 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch longer for that first wing. That's just about right. So I'm going to pinch my tie-in spot. I'm going to make a cut. Try to make that nice and straight so the thread can whip on it, or whip over it, and bind it down to the tube. Push that into the tube. That one didn't fly. Let me shorten that thread a little bit. Okay, there's 1 wrap, 2 wraps, 3 wraps, and before it's really secured, again with the thumb and forefinger, and just wiggle it and watch that thing splay. This adds a nice effect in the water. Maybe just a little bit more splay out of that would be good. I don't know if the video can do that justice, but that is something I like to do. You know, it helps me catch another 3,000 or 4,000 fish each season. Everybody can get as tricky as they want with their flies. It's kind of like one of those deals where when you're catching fish, you talk about how many, and when we're not catching fish, we all talk about how to do it. This is another way to do it. Okay, so this is going to be tied. I'm just putting a medium copper wire rib. I don't have small in front of me. I'd probably prefer small. So we're going to put a medium copper rib in here, and that's going to help keep the hackle through the body durable. I'm going to bind that down so the tying point's good, because once I get the body on, there's no retying this in. Okay, and I've noticed, I don't know why, but if you take this black thread, just a standard 6/0, and coat the tube body with it, once you put that pearl mylar saltwater flash over the top, or the spooled mylar, kind of glows a little peacock color through it. Looks nice. Another good waste of time to spend the time to coat that nice and even. There we go. So, with a piece of saltwater flash, you get a lot of these things. You're going to find too, the one reason why I use these things, you guys sell these at the store, I'm sure, they're really durable. When you hammer on that thing, it's hard to break. So I like that stuff versus the spools, but they both work just fine. And for this mylar, it can be a little bit not so durable with steel head's teeth when they're turning back and forth. You put a good tie-in on that, and we'll try this again. What did we say earlier, Jason? Expert till the camera turns on?
Mm-hmm.
There it was. Okay, so I'm going to take this thing to the back of the tube where the rear wing tie-in is, and then just go back forward right on top. That gets rid of any gaps from the first wrap, makes it quite a bit more durable. There's a mylar body kind of showing that little peacock effect. Looks pretty cool. Clip the excess out of there. So shrimpish Rambulance is kind of orange from behind the drop weight, 6mm drop weight, to the rear of the fly. It's going to be pink all in the front of it. So I'm going to put in a fairly hot orange hackle. This one again can be saddle. It can be schloppen. This is off of a package of saddle hackle, and it's just one of the bigger, more schloppen looking pieces. 2 collar turns in the front, make sure they don't bind on themselves. And then I'll just spin that through the body once, twice, to the back of the fly on number 3, so it's still fairly sparse. It's kind of webbed, so just run your finger through them to get rid of some of the webbiness. And again, when you're locking this down, just kind of, don't force it, trying to go too fast, but if you just wiggle that rib through there, it's not going to bind any of those fibers as you're going through. I think I just bound a few. There we go. May have to cuss at it, that might help. Okay, so I've got that through. Couple of thread wraps to hold that down. Don't use your good scissors, I just did, to cut the wire. If you want your scissors to stay sharper longer, that's a good idea. Now I did, because there's a lot going on in this body, I did zap-a-gap that weight in the position where I've tied a million of these things so I know where I want it. But that way, as I'm working forward, the drop weight's not sliding forward and making the body longer, messing up my proportions. So you can zap-a-gap it or not, your choice. And then we've got that neck between the hackle and the drop weight again. I just don't like that appearance. I'm going to put a little bit more of this sun-kissed orange fish dope dubbing. It's another one I like using for steelhead. We talked about that in previous videos. That's a Montana Fly Company product too. It's also found here at Northwest Fly Fishing Outfitters. Okay, so just dub a little bit, piling it right on top of itself so it doesn't go back and smash the hackles. That last wrap is a little bit loose, that's good, and it'll be a little fuzzy. Take my thread right up and over the top of that drop weight. Put a few nice wraps, there we go. I am set and ready for my next wing. So this is where we're going to introduce pink. First thing I'm going to do is go with pink craft fur wing. Just like the wing before, except in the front. Okay, again, same story. There's the wing. I want to get rid of the short stuff just immediately. Get a lot of the mass for the tying point out of there. Originally, I developed this fly off of an OPB story, watching sneaker fish mess with steelhead. and the blue and black one. I used to tie this on the micro tube. I find that the nano tube's a little bit longer and just gives me a little bit less constraints on how nice and neat I have to tie this thing. So I'm going to make this wing, and again, like, so the schloppen's one length, the tail's, the rear wing's a longer length, this rear hackle, I don't want anything really to be the same length so that when it gets wet it doesn't have a tendency just to clump. That's about 5/8 inches longer, shorter than the rear wing. So once I've got that measured, make a nice straight cut, lay that on the tube, push it down into the tube, 1 wrap, 2 wraps, 3 wraps, get your thumb and forefinger in there, give it a little bit of a splay. That one worked out really nicely. Bind that. There's a couple ways you can do this too. If you're the tube has some compression, so it's really easy to get materials to bind down to the tube. If you're really worried about long-term durability, put a little Zappa Gap on it, sweep your wing back. And I am pinching this wing right up to that drop weight, and what that does is that forces the wing up, so water's going to make it move. Flies that have boogie are my favorite. Next step is going to be either a pearl flashabou or crinkle mirror flash. I'm going to run these down the side. I just want 2 pieces. I've got 3 in there. 2 of those. I divide it roughly in half. Tie it in down as lateral lines. Maybe 3 turns, 4 turns. Bring the remaining 2 over the top and down the other lateral line. We'll sweep these guys back and cut them at just slightly different lengths. And there were still 3 in there. When I'm done with this fly, I will take another one out. It was hidden together or stuck together. Okay, so there's some lateral lines, and again, just a little bit different length is a good thing. Some shorter, some longer. Okay, so here's the addition of the pink. I'm going to tie in a marabou quill tip first, and I usually go through these things and throw away the bad ones and look for thin stems that I know can be wrapped without breaking. So I kind of pre-prep a lot of that stuff so I can just grab and go. So this is a nice hot or fluorescent pink. Sweep it back, prep it, tie it in tip first. And again, depending on how dense the feather is, probably depends on how many wraps you want. I still want this somewhat sparse. So I'll just start spinning it and taking a look and stop where it looks good. Feather bound. There we go. Okay, so there's 1 full turn, which represents almost nothing on the tube. A 2nd full turn. Hopefully the length of these videos aren't turning you guys off. The idea is to not necessarily tie the fly that I'm tying, but just learn a little bit about a tube system and a different way to think about designing your flies. That looks like just about the right amount of marabou. Clip that stem. There we go. There's enough to have some mass, but still wispy and sparse. Okay. From here I'm going to take just kind of a light shell pink dyed flashabou. I'm going to V this over the top, so divide it roughly in half. There's my tie-in point. Instead of being on lateral lines, these are going to be up on the top of the fly, or top of the tube. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Bend these backwards. That's going to make the tie-in point durable. Got a little marabou that's not agreeing with anybody else. So I just kind of V those over the top. I'm going to go back here and trim those. They're going to be a little bit longer than the rest of them. There we go. Everything's a little different length. And keep in mind, if you've just got a couple pieces of flash as lateral lines and a couple pieces of flash over the top, when you put that in the water, that may be more flash than you're looking for. Just tear them out or cut them off on the river as needed. So here is a piece of fluorescent pink schlappen to finish this fly. This is going to take some of the force of the water, diffuse it. I could also put like a Pro Soft Sonic disc in here, but this fly is a little bit more, I don't know, somewhat intruderish. and I want to keep it very easy to cast. So I'm just going to tie that in tip first, sweep those hackles back down the stem with just a light rake with the scissors, edge of the scissors, and I'll put a few turns in there until that looks a little bit more full. And that's going to diffuse the water and allow the wings to keep moving in the current. I used about 4 or 5 full turns on that one. It gives you a nice contrast. This is my Spey Fisherman's pink rubber worm. You might find that you like the steelhead green. This is a good color for steelhead green. When the water gets a little bit off color, as a glacially fed river, when it gets a little bit dirtier than steelhead green to fairly dirty water that shows up really well, you may not like this fly so much in the lower, clear, cold water. I've actually watched fish run from this. In low, clear, and cold, I think they're a little bit more subdued and a little bit smaller sizes, reds and blacks in the cold, clear, low water. It's kind of weird in the wintertime. When it's low, it's always clear, and when it's clear, it's always cold, so they all go hand in hand to each other. So pick your flies accordingly and fish like everyone's going to be the one that takes a fish. I think you'll enjoy yourself and not feel like you need to skip rocks. So I'm going to do a little zapper gap and a quick 3-turn, 4-turn whip finish, something like that. Clip that out of there. Okay, so push everything off. Now we're just going to real quickly again, there's the last piece, that hackle tip is still sitting in there. I'm going to cut that guy out right now. There we go. Now we're going to show you how to trim these things without catching them on fire, melting the hole closed, and all that good stuff. Thanks for taking a look. Alright, so we finished the shrimpish Rambulance, slid the tube and the hook guide off the needle. Now we just want to finish it up. If you haven't seen another Pro Tube video, I do this every time, but let's do it again. So the key to not lighting this plastic on fire and closing the hole and all that stuff is to cut it razor blade instead of scissors. It doesn't crimp the tube. Cut it really short. I don't know if you can see that from here. It's a clear tube, but that's about 1 millimeter. The thickness of the white on your fingernail. Hold it vertical, turn the flame on, and just roll the lip. There you go. And that's going to keep the hole open. It's going to hold a cone or anything you want to hold in front of it, so it's not just for finish and fly with a thread whip, but that's great. So cut them short, don't worry about that, and just once you put the heat to it, roll the edge, and you'll have your finished fly ready to go. Thanks for taking a look.